This futuristic story begins at a time when a plague has spread everywhere due to bats. This is a dangerous disease that is affecting humans as it spreads all around. The most shocking part is that normal humans are also being converted into vampires due to this virus, and so far, this dangerous virus has affected almost 90% of humans, meaning that 90% of humans have become vampires. These vampires survive by drinking human blood, which puts the lives of the remaining humans in danger. These vampires cannot go out in sunlight because it burns their bodies completely, which is why they operate only at night, going out to perform their activities. Many vampires have even created cars to travel during the day, which do not allow any sunlight inside, and they live among humans in this way. We are shown a private organization of vampires that conducts a lot of investigations. All the board members are sitting and discussing that the number of humans has now fallen to less than 5%, and if this is not controlled, humans will be extinct in a few years. Due to the lack of blood from humans, the number of vampires will also decline. For this reason, the private company is working on creating synthetic blood that can alleviate the vampires' shortage and make them completely independent of human blood. We are introduced to Dr. Edward, who works in that company and is involved in the creation of this synthetic blood. When Edward is sitting with his senior members discussing the situation, he mentions that due to the shortage of humans, vampires are not getting proper blood. Because of this, vampires are undergoing strange changes, meaning their bodies are becoming hybrid, and they are all turning into subsiders. Subsiders are a dangerous breed of vampires whose bodies resemble those of creatures. They are a threat to both humans and vampires because they cannot leave vampires alive. Until the shortage of vampire blood is resolved, the danger will persist. Until then, they will continue to convert into subsiders. Therefore, the senior members now tell Dr. Edward to complete the process of creating synthetic blood and to experiment with it on vampires as soon as possible. However, Dr. Edward explains that the synthetic blood is not yet fully ready, but he has no option but to follow the orders given by his senior members. So, Dr. Edward inserts the synthetic blood he has created into a vampire's body. Initially, everything seems normal, but suddenly the vampire's heartbeat starts increasing, and within the next moment, he dies. This indicates that the synthetic blood is not yet ready to work on any vampire's body, and Dr. Edward will have to work harder to achieve proper results. Now, Edward is sitting in his car, driving down the road, when he suddenly notices that his ears are growing in a very strange way, a clear sign that he is also converting into a subsider because his body is experiencing a shortage of human blood. Edward becomes quite distressed by this, and his attention drifts from the road, causing his car to collide with an oncoming vehicle. In that other car, there are two humans who get out and begin to attack Edward, as they realize he is a vampire and might retaliate. One of them, a lady named Audrey, quickly hits Edward on the arm with her crossbow, but it doesn't affect him at all. On the contrary, he tries to convince them that he doesn't want to hurt them. In fact, Edward is a vampire who does not drink human blood at all, he survives solely on the blood of animals. After a short while, they hear the sound of sirens because police officers are arriving. So, Edward tells the two humans to hide in his car, as these officers are also vampires, and if they capture any human, they would take them away for experiments. For the time being, Edward's words convince them, and they get into the car. When the vampire police officers arrive, Edward misdirects them, claiming that humans went that way. So, the two vampire police officers head in that direction. After a while, Audrey and a man accompanying her step outside and go their separate ways. Edward has now returned home after the entire incident, but he sees that his brother is at his house, someone he doesn't usually get along with. In fact, Edward's brother works for the military and is also a vampire. His simple job is to capture humans and hand them over to the government, which extracts their blood and provides it to the vampires. Since it had been a long time since his brother visited, he brought a gift of human blood for Edward to drink. However, Edward had never consumed human blood, so he declines his brother's offer. But Edward's brother, enraged, starts shouting at him, insisting that he must do it, as it's a true sign of being a vampire to hate humans. In a fit of anger, Edward's brother breaks the bottle, spilling the blood everywhere. A fight was about to ensue between the two, but suddenly a subsider emerges from the darkness. This was another form of a vampire that becomes terrifying due to a lack of blood. The subsider rushes towards the wall, licking up the spilled blood, and then unfurls its large wings, attacking Edward. Edward immediately calls the police officers for help. However, since Edward's brother is a military officer, he bravely kills the subsider. After a while, when the police officers arrive and conduct their investigation, they determine that the subsider was none other than Edward's servant, who had transformed into this horrific creature due to a lack of blood. Both Edward and his brother find themselves in a dire situation, as they barely escape death, and now the cases of subsiders may continue to rise. Shortly after, we learn that a lady named Audrey has come to Edward's house to meet him. Audrey gives Edward an address and tells him that he should come and meet her because she has something very important to tell him. The next day, Edward receives a call from his senior, who informs him that there is no longer a need to create synthetic blood. Instead, they have found some billionaire vampires willing to pay a lot of money for human blood. Therefore, they need to focus on capturing the remaining humans to extract their blood. However, Edward cannot accept any of this. He is determined to save humans at all costs. So, he heads directly to the address given by Audrey, where she is present. Audrey introduces Edward to a man named Alvin. She explains that Alvin used to be a vampire but has now completely transformed into a human. Although Edward doesn't initially trust this, upon checking, he sees that Alvin appears to be a complete human who was once a vampire. Alvin tells Edward that if they can find out how this happened, they could convert all other vampires into humans as well. Just as they are about to discuss further, Edward's brother suddenly arrives. Edward's brother had overheard their conversation and had been following them since then to capture them. Shortly after, military tanks arrive at the scene, wanting to apprehend them. But Alvin and Audrey quickly start attacking, and they flee with Edward, knowing that if they end up in military custody, escape would be impossible. Edward, Alvin, and Audrey discuss the incident together. Alvin reveals to Edward that one day while he was driving, he had an accident and fell directly into the water. As he was falling, the sun's rays hit him, causing his body to burn. After he emerged from the water, he found he had completely turned into a human. Audrey had called Edward to find out the scientific reason behind this phenomenon. Now, the three of them travel directly to a large area where humans used to live. After discovering some scientific equipment there, Edward tests Alvin's blood sample. After completing his research, Edward finally understands the reason behind this transformation. When Alvin had his accident, he had come into contact with the sun for a brief moment. The virus inside him had completely vanished, and as soon as it disappeared, Alvin emerged back into the water, which saved his life and turned him into a normal human. This means Edward now understands how any vampire can be converted into a human and the scientific reason behind it. Now, we see Edward's senior employee, whose company is facing a significant shortage of human blood. Due to this shortage, all vampires are slowly converting into subsiders. If they don't have access to human blood, they won't be able to survive. Therefore, Edward Sr. has ordered that wherever humans are found, they must be captured so that their blood can be extracted for the vampire's survival. Inside the city, the number of subsiders is rapidly increasing due to the lack of blood, which means a solution needs to be found quickly. Next, we see a lady and a man driving a truck. They are both humans who work for dairy and are heading to the place where all the humans hide together. However, on their way, they are surrounded by several vampire soldiers who are attempting to capture them to extract their blood. The two of them try to save their lives by finding a place to hide, and the lady immediately calls Audrey. Audrey quickly informs everyone that the soldiers are coming to attack that location, so they need to leave as soon as possible for a safer place. The vampire soldiers manage to capture both the man and the woman, and we know how badly they will be treated at that base. All the humans at that hideout start to leave, but Edward does not want to go because he needs to find out how the virus left Alvin's body. Now, only Edward, Audrey, and Alvin remain inside the facility. Due to the lack of other test subjects, Edward decides to use all these processes on himself, meaning that Edward will go through the same experiences that Alvin did, which led to the removal of the vampire properties from his body. Edward is in a small chamber, the upper portion of which has been open for a while, allowing sunlight to fall on his body, causing him to burn. Audrey is controlling how long he needs to stay under the sunlight, as Edward had defined these measurements earlier. After burning for a considerable time, Audrey finally pours water on him, extinguishing the flames. However, the shocking reality is that Edward is starting to become a human. The vampire virus inside him has completely vanished. Shortly after, several soldiers arrive who are trying to capture humans. For this reason, Edward, Audrey, and Alvin hide in the water so that they can't be found. The soldiers search desperately, but none of them can locate the humans. Among these soldiers is Edward's brother, who spots a lady who is none other than Edward Sr.'s daughter. In fact, Edward Sr.'s daughter is a human and has never lived with her father. Because of this, Edward Sr. had instructed Edward's brother that if he finds his daughter, he should bite her and turn her into a vampire. Edward's brother did exactly that, biting the senior's daughter, which converted her into a vampire. However, she keeps insisting that she will not harm any humans. Inside the city, the number of subsiders has drastically increased. Therefore, the government has decided to eliminate all subsiders because they pose a threat to the vampire community. All the soldiers tie up the subsiders and take them out into the sunlight, where they burn to death. Edward's brother sees that among these subsiders is the senior's daughter, the same one he had bitten to convert into a vampire. She is now burning badly and dies there. This is the first time Edward's brother realizes that real humans are just hiding from place to place for their survival. Now we see Edward sitting with Audrey and Alvin. And he had decided that he would fix all the vampires by any means necessary, believing that this was the only way to save the human race. Edward now went directly with Audrey and Alvin to one of his other employees who worked with him to create synthetic blood. Edward pointed a gun at his partner and said that he wanted his help because he had figured out how vampires could be converted into humans. When Edward's partner saw him, he was astonished because Edward had truly become a human, which was nothing short of a miracle. It seemed that Edward had found a solution to the old virus. But what Edward didn't know was that his partner was betraying him. Edward's partner immediately called the police officers, who quickly arrived and captured Audrey. Edward and Alvin immediately attacked them and took the opportunity to escape. The situation was that Edward's partner had created synthetic blood, and he wanted all the credit for this work. The company's senior was interested in selling this synthetic blood to make a lot of money, regardless of how many humans' lives were lost. They only cared about their profits. Edward and Alvin managed to reach a safe place, but now Edward's brother was present in front of them. At first, he tried to attack them, but then he began to tell his brother that he wanted to help. He had also realized how these vampires were torturing humans. Edward was pleased to hear this, but suddenly changes started happening to his brother's body because he hadn't consumed blood for several days, and due to a lack of blood, he was slowly converting into a subsider. Gradually, he began to feel a craving for blood and jumped directly at Alvin, biting him and extracting blood. However, Edward immediately separated him, intending to kill his brother. But shortly afterward, he discovered that his brother had also become a normal human. When Edward deeply reflected on this, he concluded that anyone who had been converted from a vampire to a human. So, his blood was the solution to the virus, meaning Edward's task had become significantly easier, and he was determined to accomplish it. Edward wanted to save Audrey by any means necessary, so he went straight to his senior and began to manipulate him. Edward told his senior that he had realized his mistake and wanted to be converted back into a vampire. As a result, Edward's senior came directly to him and started to bite his neck. However, by drinking Edward's blood, Edward Sr. also converted into a human. Edward had captured his senior and sent him straight to the soldiers, who were vampires and hadn't had blood for several days. Now, since Edward Sr. had become a normal human, all the vampire soldiers attacked him, constantly feeding on him. As a result, those soldiers also became humans, but amidst all this, Edward Sr. died. Edward had managed to free Audrey and was fleeing with her when vampire soldiers appeared in front of him again. The good news was that Edward's brother arrived and started firing at all the soldiers, telling his brother and Audrey to escape. But they had to keep in mind that now all those soldiers had become humans. After continuously saving Edward, Edward's brother was completely surrounded by the vampire soldiers. He couldn't do anything because he had lost all the vampire abilities. The soldiers lunged at Edward's brother all at once and began to drink his blood, causing them to start converting from vampires back into humans. Edward's brother sacrificed his life to save his brother. As Edward was leaving with Audrey, his partner confronted him. Edward's partner tried to stop him because he had created synthetic blood and wanted to take all the credit in the company using it. Edward's partner didn't want anyone to convert vampires back into humans, so he drew his gun and pointed it at them, intending to kill them. Suddenly, Alvin appeared. With the help of his weapon, Alvin shot Edward's partner, causing him to explode and die right there. All the vampire soldiers present in that facility had now turned back into humans, meaning their consciousness had returned. Edward had found the solution to the virus, so he, along with Alvin and the loader, set out on the mission to convert all vampires around the world back into humans. Even the soldiers inside the facility were ready to support them, and now they faced a long battle that they had to win at all costs. And so, our story comes to an end here.